Hi guys, gnembon here. Welcome to 17th episode of Fun Farms. Today it's gonna be a little bit different. Not only we won't be farming any mobs, but trees instead, but we are starting here in Minecraft Bedrock Edition. Why? First of all, in my Bedrock overview video I told there is no 2x2 trees in this version, which apparently is not true. They just don't grow at Y0, it's the same as in Java. It's the same bug, just nicely ported from one platform to another. So I felt a little bit sorry and decided to make a tree farm, just to compensate a bit. Second of all, I always wanted to make a tree farm, simple enough so even I could understand fully how it works. But in Java there is no reason to compete with tree masters like in Mango or Redstone or Hungry. So Bedrock might be a good platform to start with. And it might be also a great opportunity to start with something that can harvest with small modifications all sorts of small trees in all platforms. A truly universal, small little tree farm. And honestly, I haven't looked in details in any of Ilmango's tree farms, not to get biased towards any solution or any idea, and hopefully I could come up with something interesting and maybe I can throw in this way a few fresh ideas to the tree farm tech. So let's start with a little refresher on our knowledge of Bedrock Redstone and how it changed from the last time we looked at it. Big changes to pistons. 4 game tick extension, 2 game tick retraction, which is definitely a step in a good direction. And on top of that, maybe to make it even faster, they sometimes allow to push and pull pistons that are extending or retracting as well, which leads to some interesting things, so to speak. This change actually made me redo completely these farms that I have here, because I made them way back in 1.2.2 I believe, and they were still working, just being super slow. So the only extra piece of piston tech you need to know at this point is that the double piston extenders using observers, which I showed before, don't need a 9 redstone tick signals, but 6, and they can work even with 5 tick signals sometimes. So that's your Bedrock redstone randomness at its finest. So sometimes the piston in the back decides not to pull the piston up front, and sometimes it pulls it while the other one keeps retracting. Pistons are in general a little bit weird, and we can see in the background the wall seems like headless pistons, but if you get closer they kinda show up, which is an indication that unlike in Java, pistons are not just simple blocks, but they may have some block entity attached to them. This explains why I couldn't make a simple piston bud based on push limit, as it's quite obvious that entities they track every tick if they can push, if they were blocks. This makes for an interesting mechanic where you don't need any wires just to make a simple piston fit tape. It just works like that. Let's look at some other components. Observers changed a lot, and now their reaction time seems to be 1 game tick, and depending when you trigger them, whether it's in the redstone action or reaction tick, in this situation command blocks either trigger at the same time or 2 game ticks apart, which is interesting. The more observers you add, the more delay you're adding, 2 game ticks per each, but still you may get this to 1 tick difference using player input. However, with redstone input they're actually significantly slower, with 4 game ticks reaction time, but I have no idea why this happens. At least they don't form these massively annoying update trees where 1 activation from 1 observer causes 2 activations of the observer attached to it, and now they properly transfer 1 tick signals. So this is actually possible to make an observer clock just by spacing them into each other. Also, I don't know if I showed it before, torches react to 1 tick signals, so they act pretty much like inverted repeaters and not like Java torches, which make them arguably a little bit more useful. Oh, and glass. In Bedrock you can not only place redstone components on glass, but you can also staircase signals using glass, and it works both ways, up and down and up. I so want to have it in Java, it's so useful and nice and clean way to grab a signal from multiple sources organized in a column. Speaking of nice, the fact that you can move pistons while they're extending makes stuff so awesome. Check this one. Kablam! No need for any weird Dragon Eggs, lazy chunk mechanic or funky headless piston malarkey. It's nice and clean. I love it. I love it. And you know, just rotate the piston. It's awesome. I love it. Nice and clean. And it also stacks easily as well, thanks to the lack of quasi connectivity. It's not instant, some things in Bedrock needs patience to work, but eventually with this double piston extender action we can do what we want, nice and clean. I love it. Just don't get used to it, it's not gonna stay, but I love it. Speaking of awesome stuff, All of this tree farm tech we'll be showing here today is mainly based on these double piston extenders, but beware if you try to do triple piston extender action. They might disappear on you or turn into stone. I also love this quirk, it's just not that useful than the other one. But if you have too many spare pistons, you can always make a stone generator out of them. All in all, interesting features you guys have on this Bedrock edition. I would like to thank Maladjusted Platypus and Clippy from Technical Minecraft Discord and Necromantic from Twitter for sharing some of these oddities with me. It's interesting. Okay, so let's go to the task at hand. Trees in Bedrock edition are much harder to work with than in Java. I've been growing a bunch of trees here trying to figure out the conditions that they require, and it seems that all the trees work pretty much the same way. They can have stuff around the sapling when the trunk is, then they need a 3x3 space, and the crown needs a 5x5 area cleared. The issue is that if a tree wants to grow smaller, the 5x5 area needs to be lower as well, which is a bummer because it means that no matter what we do, we need to pretty much have a 5x5 area free all around the tree, not to waste bone meal. In Bedrock there's this useful feature that when you are in creative, you grow a tree every single time you use the bone meal, unless the grow attempt is blocked, which shows nicely if you are wasting any grow attempts. So yeah, in this case we essentially need a 5x5. On top of that, and that's the most challenging part, unlike with Java, this 5x5 area needs to have no other blocks than air, leaves or dirt, not even logs, which makes the problem quite complex because you can have, for example, a dirt pillar waiting on the side to push the trunk when it grows, but the pistons have to be outside of this 5x5 area, and you would have to push the tree with its trunk outside of this 5x5 area as well. So we would need to have like a quadruple flat piston extender just to push an oak tree off. That's no fun. So we'll have to come up with something else. Okay, so let's look at acacia now. Acacia can grow branches outside of the main trunk, but we have some ways to control it. From my testing, trees will replace dirt and leaf blocks on the main trunk, but acacia will not replace dirt that is outside of the main trunk area for the branches, and it will be able to grow anyways. However, the more area we block with the dirt, the less potential logs we'll be able to harvest, but in general, this mechanic will eventually come in handy. Also a note on giant trees, which you can grow, just not at the bottom of the world. They also require a 5x5 area around the main sapling, the one that, if you grow it, that grows one higher than the other ones. But for the symmetry, Sake will probably need to work with, with a 6x6 area anyways. So let's talk a little bit about harvesting, and here we have a little bit of a problem. The two main and most convenient methods of automatically breaking blocks in the game are TNT and withers. I really don't know what to start with because in Bedrock both methods are just plainly useless. Let's do TNT first. Not only the explosions don't drop any blocks if the world has been created as a creative world, which I would say it's a bug, but on top of that, in Java TNT has this nice feature, or rather blocks that piston push. If you manage to blow blocks which are in motion, not only their blast resistance is very low, meaning that we can blow a lot of blocks at once, but on top of that these blocks drop their corresponding items 100% of the time. It is an awesome mechanic explicitly coded into the game that required quite a bit of finagling and technical expertise to get it right and synchronize with the rest of the contraption, giving the safest way to harvest blocks, comparing to withers for example. And if you combine it with legitimate TNT, that gives you a fair return on investment of manual work to gather sand, technical mind to get the tree farm running, and the output in the form of the logs. But here, it's the other way around. Blocks that move have infinite blast resistance. I don't love it. I think the vanilla mechanics is very well balanced in this regard. It encourages to play safe with no withers involved, and is quirky enough to require some expertise, and here, not possible. So TNT, useless. So let's look at the withers. So I think we have established that at this point carving out the wither cage shouldn't be a big issue. So let me spawn a wither here. Notice that I'm spawning it on the edge of the cage, which will be clear soon why. Okay. You can see the wither is trapped. As you can see here, if I spawn a bunch of chicken, yeah, he cannot move. By the way, traditional wither cages doesn't seem to work, as he tend to bounce around when spawning, so you need a little bit more bedrock. But it doesn't matter, because check this out. I log out, I log back in, and the wither moved. It's still trapped, because here we have a bigger area, but let's log out again, log back in, and the wither is on the loose. That's definitely a nasty bug, and I hope it didn't get coded specifically to get the withers loose, and I hope it was an honest mistake, because that's not how entities are supposed to be saved. Personally, I don't like the idea of trapping the withers in contraptions at the first place, but that's the rules of the game, with Bedrock being an indestructible block even for the withers. So we are supposed to be able to keep them in it. I don't trust the withers anyways, because entities in Minecraft are kinda glitchy sometimes, but that's kinda different story. It should be possible to trap them. The last method of breaking blocks are gas and maybe creepers, which are rather weak and ineffective, so we are pretty much relying on chopping wood ourselves. So after we have established that our method of chopping woods will be using axes, let's look at the tree farms I came up with. So let's skip all the failed attempts and start the big whammy, the 2x2 spruce tree farm concept. So here's the piston layout. It consists only on double piston observer based extenders and retractors. I've shown at the beginning, and I've made it so that each quadrant is kinda independent, so it's easier to put it together. So here's our 5x5 area, which is required for the tree to grow, which I extended to 6x6 so it's symmetric. Each side needs to run on a 6-tick poles, which I have offset by 12 ticks between each section. In the original design from 1.2.2 I had to use a 10-tick signal and 20-tick offset, so that was super slow. But in hindsight, the speed doesn't matter at all, as you need to harvest the tree anyways with your trusty axe. So what happens is a log is being first pulled by this double piston retractor here, then we have a double piston retractor on the side, then we pull the logs outside of the 6x6 area with this piston, and at this point we can grow another tree. And then we move blocks to here, here and here. Then with a double piston retractor we can move it to here. And then we have to push it quickly here and forward, and we can do it because both of those pistons here are gonna be powered by attracting for a moment this piston just to prevent this sticky from making an action. So it's better to run it and let you see how it goes. Oh, and this obsidian here is just to prevent any damage to the piston layout in case a player does something wrong or the farm gets jammed, which shouldn't happen unless we are full. But with this, we wouldn't worry about the need of rebuilding anything. Let's turn it on. As we can see, it starts to alternate each side. So let's dump a bunch of blocks on it. Notice quite funky sand behavior here. You can see how the blocks are snaking around. And here we can check the 3-piston action here. And from now on here we can send each quarter of the tree to its own cuber. So this is a full slice of the farm. Notice that I used here extra dirt just to protect the observers from extra leaves that may spawn and despawn in an unfortunate moment, which may cause them to misfire and mess up the layout. Also on the sides I decided to use torch towers to transmit the signals up, not only because it's easier to tile it, but also creates this awesome wave effect when harvesting a tree. It's slow, but it doesn't matter. And the reason, you're gonna spend 5 to 10 minutes spawning this tree here in the farm, and then you'll have to chop for an hour or two just to harvest all this wood. So I'm not that concerned about the speed. So let's get into it. You can notice that there is not too much in terms of automation. You plant the sapling yourself, you bone meal yourself, and then you press the button to get the tree out of the way. And now you have to wait until everything is done, otherwise you could break it, and then you can harvest the next tree again. Automation, as I said, unnecessary. Everything is gonna be chopped manually anyways. Sapling return, it's massive. There is not even need for hoppers, as you will be getting more saplings than you ever want just sitting at this space. Sapling rate seems to be miles above the one in Bedrock. Okay, so let's maybe observe the other tree from a little bit different perspective. So what I did here is just to grab a user input, convert it to a 6-tick pulse, and just silk around like I've shown previously. And here in the corners we have this monostable using observers, pretty much the only reliable way to get 1-tick pulse in this version. That goes into this piston thingy-magic, and the other side of the signal goes to the corresponding trapdoors. So here, just to be able to trigger it remotely, I made this simple detector, so I could trigger it from the top just by dropping a gravity block. Okay, so now we can turn it on from the top, so let's go and check this out. I would say this farm is pretty fun to watch, and at this point, if it cannot be fast because of the collection, let's just make it fun. So here is your 2x2 spruce tree farm. Okay, so now let's look at something more practical. A universal small tree farm for all small tree types. So here's the bottom section just cut off with all the hoppers removed so we can easily go through it, because in Bedrock there is no spectator. Yay! So what we have here is a small bone meal storage, as you don't need much more, as once you fill the farm you would have to run to the cuber and in a moment anyways. And a simple log detection by closing up the wire. The signal then goes via this comparator to the bottom, and this comparator pulse extender, which tells the farm how long it takes to harvest the tree. The cool feature of comparator pulse extenders that some people know is the fact that we can vary their output not only by adding comparators to the chain, but also by varying the signal strength that comparator loops. In this case, depending on which mode we are in, we either need a longer signal for acacia trees, we'll talk about acacia trees in a moment, or shorter for trees that needs harvesting only once. So that's why we want to vary the content of this furnace here to reduce or increase the strength of the signal from the farm. Then we would power this piston, which would turn off the annoying bone meal clock and disable the trunk detector, so even if we place the next sapling automatically, we won't be wasting any bone meal. The second part of the signal goes through this piston into this dropper where we can put saplings if you want. And here we have the 6 sticks pull generator required for our double piston grabbers. So the signal first go here, so that the main track can be pulled to the side, and then we engage all the leaf crushers, which also pulls the log to the side, to the corner. And then we have this clever circuit using observers to trigger this pair of pistons properly, so we can transport the logs out of the farm. Yeah, it doesn't work, as there is still a piston connectivity bug. This one, I think, thinks he can be powered from this wire, which is not true. But it doesn't matter, as it will technically be on cooldown after retracting, so when these extend it will be fine, like that. So initially I had a different idea how to do it, which is in here. So I would trigger first this piston, which would grab the log, and then to power all of them here, which may cause some ambiguity. So to counteract it, I would power this one only via these cauldrons with signal of 1, just to power just this column of pistons. That would make just this one extend, and through the observers this one, and it will block these guys from extending. So if you apply power in this spot, we don't have this randomness here anymore. And I'm mentioning here this because of one reason. You would think that if you power 2 conflicting pistons from the same source, you would have this randomness like I shown here, so you need this extra finagling to manage it. That would be true for most locations. But it turns out that updates are truly random, but only within a single chunk. So technically what we could try to do is to place this column of pistons on a chunk boundary, like here. So let's analyze the situation here. We would say that this should work. Stickies are engaged first, and then we provide power to the joint blocks, and while the stickies are on a cooldown, they should yield the way for normal pistons to push to the side. And that's what happens, but without any blocks. If you add blocks, some pistons can decide I'm actually not retracting, but extending again, which messes up the whole situation, and it does, if you add blocks. But what if you place the same setup on a chunk boundary? Here we can see on our X coordinate, the switches between 15 and 16. So it turns out that the updates in the lower chunk are processed before the updates in the chunk with the higher coordinates. So what we have as a result of a lack of any sort of deterministic behavior, we have an extreme case of totally weird locality. And here goes your random updates model. Works every single freaking time. I like the column placing blocks though. I wish this was in vanilla. Thankfully we don't have to do all this magic if we don't want placing all the farm exactly specific coordinates because of combating random update order in tight spaces. I used here a different solution instead, proposed by Maladjusted Platypus from Technical Minecraft Discord. So this was just a side note, but kinda important to show the innards of the Bedrock redstone system and how we can try to battle the randomness a little bit. There's 2 more aspects to this farm. Acacia. First let me harvest this one in a single mode and see what happens. Okay, so the main trunk got moved away and the side branches were actually placed in the middle. And that's cool because now we can just run the farm again to harvest the remaining branches. So if we look down, and that's what the acacia mode actually does. It just adds one more loop to the piston system to harvest the left out branches. Now, in very rare cases, like 1 in 100 or 200, there will be a third branch that will end up in the middle after a second harvest. And in Java it doesn't matter, we can even keep farming acacia in a single mode if you are pressed for time, but in Bedrock this will impede the growth of the next tree. We could have added the third loop, but I don't think it's necessary as it's not a fully automatic farm anyways. So if you just notice that your tree doesn't want to grow after a second run, just press this button to force its cycle to clean up the third branch. You'll waste a little bit of bone meal, but as I said, this case is very rare anyways, and you're already preventing one of the branches to spawn here with the dirt. And to account for acacia, I also have one more cool system, which here has to do with the cuber. So since now it's not guaranteed that the bottom log will always be here, you can detect blocks here at any height which has been passed to this monostabler and back to the piston wall using these really handy glass redstone staircases. This is so useful. The last thing is Sapling Return, and that's what you would get from one stack of each sapling. Obviously, Sapling Return is not a problem at all with this farm. But there is one more thing. They still haven't fixed the moons. Okay, so now let's go to Java. I spent a lot of time already waffling about this farm. I'll pack up this world for you so you can download it, look it up, count the blocks, check it inside out and build it yourself. Woof, now we are back home. Honestly, the Bedrock grew on me a little bit, but good old Java is much more stable, much more predictable, and with the help of the community, I'm sure we'll be able to make it even better. So here's the farm. The only difference really is the fact that these double piston extenders are fine with a 5 tick pulls, not 6, and they do drop blocks. But that's fine since we are only using them to pull, not push, so that's okay. Also, thanks to the quasi-connectivity, we can save on one observer in each group of 4 pistons, which will also save us on protecting faces of observers from decaying leaves. Now, we don't need to use a stable 5 tick signal. What we can use is 1 tick pulse followed by 3 tick pulse, but it's essentially the same thing, it's just 2 ticks later, and requires too much redstone to turn on and off, so we don't need that. Another improvement, thanks to the quasi-connectivity, we can power the sticky pistons directly using repeaters, and save on the more complex setups. Other than that, everything works exactly the same way. So here is the layout. I won't be getting into details because it works exactly the same way. The only difference is that these observers up top need a block above them to power pistons with quasi-connectivity, but the roof is necessary with this case to prevent random tree growth. In Bedrock it didn't matter that much because no trees could grow before the previous one was fully taken away, and in this case we will be relying on precise timings for the TNT block breaking. Oh yeah, no manual labor in Java needed, and that's how it should be, so we have a roof anyways. To show best how it works, I'll enable something new I have been working just recently for the carpet mod, which is the super hot mode. Just don't tell anybody, okay? So if we have a log here in the middle to harvest, first this section here will run forward, grab it and pull it to the side. While this happens, the contra wall will run from the opposite side to push all the rogue logs to the center. Then we engage these guys from the sides to pull the trunk to the corner. And then we grab it 1 and 2 and out of the way. So now what can happen, for example with acacia, is apart from the main trunk we can have a branch over here and there and maybe somewhere here, but with consecutive harvests everything is gonna go eventually. Thankfully acacia doesn't grow that many branches at once, so 2 sequences to go around is more than enough. Now the question is, if you can grow acacia, can we grow large oak trees in the same way? And the answer is yes, to some extent. Oak can actually grow branches sideways, which may cause the farm to actually eat itself. What we can do is, instead of forcing oaks to grow 4 and 5 high, so only the small ones, we can also allow the 6 high oaks, getting much better rates and return on bone meal. But we will also allow those tiny little large oak trees to grow, which can grow branches on a predefined height, which you can immunize the farm to by using obsidian to hold the redstone for the pistons. But only if those branches are at a specific Y level. So here we have the farm itself. Here I'm using the same method to control the time for the tree harvest as in Bedrock, where I was using the furnace. And if you fill up the sugar box like here, we can harvest tree every 2.5 seconds. And that's a setting for 1 high trees. And if we flick this lever over here, we'll get a double harvest for our acacia mode. Let me show you how this works. And as you can see, these extra branches are nicely brought to the center and harvested with a second pass. The inside of the farm is sealed to keep most saplings inside. The sapling return rate is way above 20% for any of the trees, so no problem with that at all. For oak mode, you could place these blocks here like obsidian to impede the growth at this height for 5 high trees, and here you can add one more for extra 6 tall ones, which is completely safe because we have these obsidian supports where the branches would form. Since in this case the farm is actually meant to be AFK'd, I use this extra space in the corners to host a 32 double chest storage for bone meal, and there is one more corners to use as well if you think this is not enough. Couple words of caution. Since it is Java, you may have some troubles with droppers connectivity, so if you look at this elevator, it doesn't work for some odd reason. It doesn't pump up the bone meal. You would have to move the entire farm by one block up, down, left or right, and it will work. So before you build the entire farm, just check on the bone meal elevator if it works at this particular location. Then I also noticed that with this dispenser in some locations it triggers twice from the same redstone signal. That's super weird, but can be avoided using a repeater here instead of a dust. The farm is gonna be one tick slower, but that's not a big deal. So here's the chest that you would put all the saplings for AFK, and the collected saplings will stay in that chest. I separated them because of oak, which can also give you apples, and apples is not something that you may want to plant immediately if you're AFKing for longer. But for all other tree types, if you plan a longer AFK session, you can just replace this chest with a bunch of hoppers to cycle the saplings through again. The farm produces oaks up to 6 high, birch grows up to 7 high, spruce and acacia go up to 9 blocks high, and jungle up to 12 blocks high, which is its maximum. To make use of this 12 high log stream, I came up with this way to converting them into 4 high, which can be used in a TNT chamber. This part pretty much consists of 2 quadruple piston extenders using slime blocks. It's a very simple stuff, looks quite ugly, but it works based on a very clear mechanics, which I like, plus it uses glazed terracotta, which makes it very nice and pretty. And from now on you can transport the logs into your TNT chambers. Speaking of TNT, you can cheat in your TNT if you want, but I'll explain how this can all work with a legit TNT double whammy over there. So first note here about all the streams here, they're mostly on push limits, so if anything jumps on the way, although it shouldn't by itself, nothing's gonna be broken, and then logs would eventually start to jam inside the farm, which should be capable of dealing with the jamming as I explained before. The converter reduces the 12 high streams to 4 high logs, which then gets to this line, which contains a buffer for one full 12 high trees. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then it's pushed across and is split into 2 sides. Here is a very cool splitter that ignores the second observer signal from pushing pistons in front of the 4 observers. So here is where the glass staircasing with the redstone signal will be very useful. And since this side is always fuller, because it's a second, so I made this side control the TNT action. So here I turn. I could have made this one a little bit simpler, but the top row of logs is farthest away from TNT, so it technically may jam. It's very rare, but it may happen. So in this case we don't want to jam the entire corner, so what I allow here is the logs below the top one can also trigger the top one just for safety. I tested over a couple millions of logs with no issues. So here are the tagged incoming logs, which sends a push signal to the entire wall that get 1 ticked. It also goes to the counter here that counts to 3 pushes and schedules the TNT. When you get to the third one, this comparator triggers, so we can immediately disable log pushing because we need to wait for the pistons to push them in a specific time, and also cut off the signals from these observers so they don't interfere with our schedule of TNT. We also here grab the signal onto the slime blocks, which log immediately the entire farm so it doesn't harvest the next tree while we are waiting for the TNT. Then we go around here, we trigger the TNT, and then we wait a set time for it to blow up exactly when we are pushing the logs with a proper long signal, allowing logs to drop at 100% rate. One thing to note here, these 2 lines for both sides contain the same delay, just on this side the last repeater is on 1 tick, and on the other side is on 4, because technically these 2 walls can collide inside, and you want these pistons on the side to be scheduled first, In worst case scenario, if something doesn't blow up to plan, this side with all the observer detectors will be dealing with the consequences, which it can. Then after TNT goes off, we trigger this counter again, which releases all the logs that the TNT scheduler have put in. There's also another condition that can pause the farms, which is when we run out of TNT, and in this case the pause is permanent until we refill it. So how the pausing works. So if you run to the farm, the signal disables these monostablers that send signals to the pistons and to the log converter. So while it will prevent new trees from being harvested, what's currently probably happening is the tree is actually harvesting a current tree, which is fine, because we can actually account for that being able to store up to 12 logs. So one full tree, we have a space for 8 blocks over here, and we can store 4 blocks over here. Then what happens, since we are done with our TNT, we send a quick flick to these two guys, which will push them back into the stream, and then we can push once more the 4 pistons from the converter to release potentially the third set of logs. So in hindsight, TNT takes a few seconds to blow up, but we would notice very small to none delay on the tree harvesting because of this extra storage. Speaking of the output of the farm, I have here numbers for all 5 types of logs. What is important is that overall jungle is the most effective and the fastest, upwards of 8,000 logs per hour. Highest bone meal efficiency and TNT efficiency as well, if you use legit TNT. A full stack of TNT can allow you to run the farm from a little bit over an hour for jungle to 2 hours for acacia. Oaks is as usual the worst, but that's to be expected. All in all, unless you want to dupe the TNT, one piece of TNT can give us upwards of 135 logs for jungle and slightly less for other types, which is an okay trade-off of 4 pieces of non-renewable sand, unless you dupe it, for 2 and something stacks of something that is fully renewable like logs. So that was it, guys, a relatively simple and straightforward tree farm for all small tree types for both Minecraft Bedrock Edition and with slight modifications for Java Edition as well. If you guys want to build it yourself, there I will download in the description for both versions. Oh, and if you guys can help me make this mess of redstone signals around the TNT scheduling a little bit less messy, that would be highly appreciated. I managed to pack the redstone for the farm itself in a nice concise area, but the TNT connections with all the signals to different parts of the machine looks like a spaghetti-o. Anyways, a little bit of a different farm than typically in the series, but I always wanted to make my own practical and functional tree farm, and that was a good opportunity to do so. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, don't forget to leave me a like, let me know in the comments if there's anything you would suggest improving, subscribe if you are new, and see you in the next one. Bye bye!